Welcome back to Dreaming Against the Machine. I'm your host, Adam Becker. This week's guests are Ben Tarnoff and Quinn Slobodian. Now, Quinn and Ben wrote a book called Muskism, and I know that just saying the name of that book has at least half, probably more like 3/4 or 90% of you like retching and making various weird sounds. I feel the same way, don't worry. But I think that, unfortunately, we do need to take a closer look at Elon Musk. This is a guy who has way too much power, way too much money, and if we want to get him out of that position and make it so that he does not have as much effect on our world, we need to understand how he got there and the way that he operates. And, you know, there's a part of me that feels like talking about Muskism is kind of like talking about Trumpism. There isn't like a coherent, well plotted out plan that Musk has, I think, any more than Trump does. He's just sort of operating on instinct and naked self-interest and some vague ideas that he has about what he likes that don't bear a lot of relationship to reality. But the fact that he's been able to rise to power says something about the business and financial and governmental systems that we have in place. And in order to make the changes to those systems that we want to make, both to take the power away from Musk and prevent this from happening again, we got to understand how this happened. And that means talking with Quinn and Ben. So here they are. Quinn, Ben, welcome to Dreaming Against the Machine.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Actually, can I ask you two to introduce yourselves? I know who you are, but I fear that if I tried to explain who you were, I would get it wrong.
I'm Ben Tarnoff. I'm a writer from Massachusetts, co-author with Quinn of Muskism, A Guide for the Perplexed.
And my name's Quinn Slobodian. I am a professor of international history at Boston University, and I've written a few books, mostly about the history of neoliberalism, and happy to have just written this one with Ben Tarnoff about Musk.
Well, thank you again for being here.
Our pleasure.
So I met you guys at a public event for your recent book, Muskism, in downtown Oakland. What? I guess that was last month, something like that?
Wasn't it May 1st?
It was May 1st.
Oh, yeah, it was May
Of
1st.
course.
Yeah, okay. So
how could we forget?
Yeah, of course. It was May Day. No, you had a trivia contest about Musk, which I unfortunately won as a ringer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Still a little bit angry that you didn't recuse yourself.
I know, I probably should have.
Some skullduggery.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, my team was counting on me, and
Yes. You redistributed the spoils.
I
I'm
did.
sure.
Yes, I absolutely did. But your book is great. It's also terrifying. It hadn't occurred to me to think of a thing called Muskism. I tend to think of Musk as just doing what he does. I mean, that's not true. I think of Musk as having some method behind his madness, but that's not even really what you were going after. You were not saying that Musk himself is doing this stuff with this sort of coherent ideology in mind, right?
That's right. I mean, I think it's an interesting comparison to your book, actually, because in that case, I think there was a little bit more to work with as a kind of intellectual history, right? Because the rationalists and the long-termists, I mean, they actually write books, they tell you what they believe, and then they take actions that you can then compare with what they said their beliefs were and say, like, they're misleading us or they're being faithful to their crackpot ideas or whatever. But Musk, of course, is not really a coherent thinker in that way. He's never written his own manifesto. He blurts out these kind of brain farts throughout the course of the day, often in what seem like self-destructive kind of outbursts, often quite racist. So it takes some work to try to cobble together something out of that. And I think that it's important to maybe insist right from the top that what Ben and I were trying to do was not say, like, he secretly has this coherent worldview and we've uncovered it and you just have to look closely. It's more like the way people have treated Fordism. So Fordism, when people talk about that for the last 100 years now, they don't mean Henry Ford was secretly this genius thinker with tons of foresight, a kind of political philosopher. What they mean is the way that Ford did capitalism implied a certain social world that then we, as social scientists or theorists or observers, can kind of reassemble basically after the fact. So it doesn't have to be a kind of a backfilling of the superior intelligence of a Musk or a Ford, and indeed that's not what we're doing at all. But it's a way of trying to name an ensemble of kind of social forces and political relationships that can be provisionally given a label to help us figure out what's going on.
This is probably a place where the comparison to Trump is helpful. Musk and Trump have many similarities that you might guess at, such as their fondness for social media. But I think more profoundly, they're both improvisational figures. They both seem to operate more by intuition than premeditation. But that doesn't mean that we can't think about something called Trumpism or something called Muskism. I think we would probably argue that Muskism is a more useful analytic than Trumpism, but we're not trying to sane wash Musk or say that we're going to give the secret key that unlocks precisely his roadmap to success. But rather, when you zoom out, as we do in the book, and look at the life and work of Elon Musk as a whole, you find certain through lines, certain themes that recur. And interestingly, these themes always have to do with the political economic era in which Musk is living. So Musk can be seen as a Forrest Gump or Zelig-like figure that actually takes you through these distinct stages of global political economy, from the dot-com boom of Silicon Valley in the 90s, through the global war on terror, through the Obama experiment with green industrial policy, through the Web 2.0 period, so on and so forth. And that's why we think Musk is uniquely suited to this kind of treatment. It's not just that he's the richest man who's ever lived, but also that the arc of his career gives us a structure for understanding how we got here.
The idea of Musk as chaotic evil Forrest Gump had not occurred to me. Now that's going to just live in my head, and I'm going to have to deal with that. So what is Muskism? Like, in your analysis, like what? Yeah, I would agree that Musk does not have like a single coherent philosophy and never really has. I mean, he has things that he wants, but even those are not always fixed. In the book, you describe it as sovereignty as a service, sort of, right? Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
I mean, if you think about sort of pithy formulas that encapsulate other ideologies. So, for example, when people talk about Fordism, they often say mass production plus mass consumption. Or people talk about neoliberalism, which will probably be relevant for our conversation at some point. Yeah. Sometimes they'll say, the dethronement of politics by economics, or the ongoing effort to make capitalism safe from democracy. We think about Muskism as the promise of sovereignty to both nations and individuals through technology that cashes out as a greater dependence on private service providers. So it's not quite the same as neoliberalism. There isn't a kind of sacralization of the market or a demonization of the state. The state is actually welcomed as an essential partner in the project. We use the term state symbiosis to think about this dynamic relationship between primarily tech providers, the hardware and software companies that have driven American stock market growth and economic innovation for the last quarter century, to domestic clients, foreign clients, mostly governments, but not always. Often people, too, who in a crumbling world where the future seems ever more uncertain, the promise of Muskism is that if you plug into these private infrastructures, you will be safe inside of the Tesla dome, as it were. Even if you're on Mars, which, as we know, is very hard to get by on based on the rather vivid descriptions that you offered in your book.
Yeah, no, that's not happening. Let's take a little time to unpack this before we get in deeper, because I have all sorts of stuff I want to talk with you guys about. I think that this is not a way of thinking about Musk that most people are accustomed to, right? I think that insofar as people think about, like, people who don't do this for a living think about Musk at all, these days I think they think of Musk's relationship to the state, for example, as, something more like neoliberalism, like that he's interested in dismantling the power of the state. And you push back against that in your book, and I think rightly so. But I think it's not well appreciated that Musk's power and money has largely come from working with state apparatus rather than, trying to undermine it the way that someone like a Peter Thiel does.
We want to make the argument very strenuously that Musk is not and has never been a libertarian, that he's always instrumentalized the state as a source of power and profit, that he's always identified it really as indispensable to his business operations, really from the very beginning. And he does so in a number of ways. I mean, like other figures from Silicon Valley, he's quite dependent on the state, of course, as a source for R&D funding of the kind that sustained the basic technologies that Silicon Valley has enriched itself with, including perhaps most importantly, the internet. But more broadly, Musk has also identified the state as a source of subsidies, and perhaps most importantly, as a client, as a customer. He gets involved with provisioning services to the state quite early. SpaceX, as you may recall, which he founds in 2002, gets its start as a government contractor during the early years of the global war on terror. So in many respects, Musk is ahead of the curve. He's doing things before it becomes cool, so to speak. And there's been a lot of discussion about how in the last few years, Silicon Valley has turned to the state in the AI era as an essential partner for securing the massive energy inputs required for data centers that are training large language models, for access to land, for a permissive regulatory environment, and so on and so forth. And that this signals a inflection point, let's say, from the Web 2.0 platform era, where really what Silicon Valley wanted from the state was a fairly hands-off approach, economic liberalization domestically and globally, whereas now they need a more active state partner because AI is frankly so capital intensive that a different type of state capital relation is needed. Musk is a innovator in this respect. He's developing that new state tech fusion as early as the 2000s in the form of first rockets and then cars, because Tesla is important to also place within a geopolitical frame. Tesla is really able to survive because the first Obama administration identifies it as a crucial partner for an attempted energy transition in the late 2000s, which Obama is framing as necessary to reduce our reliance on foreign oil, which will then reduce our appetite for disastrous military adventures abroad like the Iraq War. So it's important here to see Musk not just as someone who is seeking fusion with the state of various kinds, what we describe as state symbiosis, but as someone who has always been a creature of geopolitics, long before geopolitics became a headline term.
Maybe I can just add a couple things there, just to append that helpful answer from Ben. I think that when people who are critics of Musk do address his relationship to the state, and they almost always describe it as crony capitalism or parasitism, right? Or like looting the public purse or ripping off the taxpayer or sucking the teat of the government, however you want to phrase it. And we're actually resistant to that description too, because crony capitalism which of course exists, and there's certainly a lot of it going around right now, is about finding, inefficient choke points in political economy that you can gather rents from because of your relationship to the government. So by definition, it can't be innovation creating. It can't be capacity expanding. You need to be, making things worse for both customers, the government, and for everyone except yourself. And there's certainly been moments when Musk has, taken wealth from the public purse and not produced something useful or, failed in his efforts. But there have been also times when he's succeeded. And I think it's really important for us to give him his due in a way when he actually did deliver on creating new markets that maybe hadn't existed before, like the consumer EV market, like satellite internet, like affordable launch. These are things that were not described well as crony capitalism, right? Actually, in the case of the Tesla example that Ben just mentioned in the Obama administration, it's really industrial policy. Yes, the Obama Department of Energy de-risked Musk's investments, but that's also what Biden was doing in the IRA for the years that he was in power, and it was considered not to be necessarily wasteful or parasitic on the part of, say, semiconductor fabs opening in Arizona, or people starting up new solar panel manufacturing facilities with government subsidies. That was considered like, okay, I mean, they're making progress on a new sector that's socially important. But the other thing I wanted to mention, especially probably relevant to some of your listeners, is this idea of Musk as kind of seeking to dismantle society or government, as someone who does seem to be trying to seek the ultimate exit, as Balaji Srinivasan put it years ago. And there are things you can certainly point to, right? I mean, first, the Mars fantasy is at some level like the ultimate exit fantasy. Like,
Yep.
No, I'm going to another planet. So I think I would make sense if someone listened to what we were saying and saying, like, come on, he said his main thing is like to found a new civilization on another planet. So like, what about that?
Yeah.
And I think we would say that's true, but what does that language of going to Mars actually deliver to him here on planet Earth? And isn't that maybe more important? That isn't, let's say, the capture of military contracts for the use of Starship for the delivery of materiel from point to point on planet Earth, or the use of Starlink satellites in the planned Golden Dome missile defense project. Like, maybe this is actually the story and Mars is kind of not the story,
Yeah.
right? Even if he presents it as a sort of shiny object. I mean, the other thing you point to is things like Starbase and the Snailbrook and the company towns he's producing here on Earth as well, which do kind of look like enclave, exit, kind of dropout spaces of the kind I described in my earlier book, Crack Up Capitalism. And I think there's some validity there too. But the trick, and it's important not to miss that, is that he's having his cake and eating it too. He's having it both ways. So yes, he's producing these rebooted company towns in which the decisions being made are aligned 100% with his own bottom line and interests, and he can immunize himself against different kinds of legal feedback mechanisms. But he's also completely dependent on having that connection to the federal government, the central government, not just in the US, but also globally. He needs buy-in from every global governing power to get to where he wants to go. So it's, one needs to be able to hold two things in your head at once. Like, yes, he wants to go to Mars and drop out and live in a compound in Texas, but he also needs to be basically a diplomat and sit down with Modi and sit down with Xi Jinping and make the case to them why their governments should do business with his government to secure the contracts that he needs.
This brings me to a question that kept coming to mind for me when I was reading your book. As you said just now, Quinn, so much of what he does is sort of, inherently contradictory in some way. And yes, he sells us on this fantasy of Mars, and it very much is a fantasy. It's not going to happen. And he uses that as an excuse to both, like, insulate himself from having to deal with the consequences of, living in a society while also, engaging in this sort of state symbiosis that you're talking about. I am curious, though. There was a word that you kept using in the book, and I want to understand a little bit more about why. You said that some of what he did ends up looking kind of prescient, right? That, he did things in, say, the 2000s and early 2010s that went against the sort of globalization trend of the time that now in this deglobalization era look prescient. And I kept thinking, probably because at the end of the day, I'm a physicist and this is how I think about things, I kept thinking about this as a kind of selection effect, right? I tend to think about Silicon Valley as being essentially a giant casino where you have many, many people like pulling the levers on these one-armed bandits all day, and most of them don't succeed. And then a few of them do, and then a very few of them succeed over and over again. And yes, there's something about the decisions that they're making that leads to those repeated successes, but a lot of it is just luck. And so I find it difficult to believe that Musk, discerned or somehow enabled or brought about this sort of anti-globalization turn, and that's why he was doing what he was doing. And I'm not saying that that's what you were saying. I'm just curious, how much of this do you think is like, yes, Musk did this because if he hadn't, we wouldn't be talking about him?
Well, I think there's a few things in your question, Adam. I think first is, what is the division of labor between luck and ability in making someone successful? Obviously, there are a lot of people in Silicon Valley who got very lucky, who were standing at the right place at the right time and got hit by a lightning bolt of money, and then have to kind of post facto construct a narrative about why they deserved it.
Yeah.
I think someone like Musk, it's a bit harder to make the case because he's been so successful at so many different junctures that we do, I believe, need to talk about why. And I think we can talk about why in ways that don't necessarily ascribe a superhuman genius to him. I think we can frame the why also in terms of structure. It doesn't need to be presented in such a way as to ennoble him or to elevate him. But I think we do need to try to identify, well, what are the things that he was particularly good at? And one of the things I think he has been very good at is intuiting, because it frankly may or may not be conscious, but intuiting certain opportunities that are inherent in the political economic environment in which he is operating. So when it comes to his production model, because that's another piece of your question, which from the 2000s, from SpaceX and Tesla, early days, is very much about vertical integration, is about reducing reliance on external suppliers, is about trying to make as much as possible in-house. Where does that come from? Well, we have one speculation we present in the book. We can't get inside his mind, but one piece of the puzzle that we present, because we think it's particularly interesting, is the fact that apartheid South Africa, where Musk, of course, was born and grew up, also pursued an industrial model that emphasized economic self-sufficiency. It did so for political reasons primarily, because the white apartheid leaders perceived themselves correctly to be encircled by threats, both within and without their borders. And in order to garrison their regime, they wanted to try to build certain things, such as cars, within the country and bring advanced technology such as IBM mainframes into the nation to help with implementing apartheid. So one could place the emphasis on economic and technological self-sufficiency that was pursued by the apartheid regime alongside Musk's industrial model as developed at SpaceX and Tesla and say, these two things look like they have quite a bit to do with one another. Now, does that mean Musk is a genius? I mean, I was asked that point blank in one of many interviews that we've been doing, I think by an Australian journalist. Do you think Musk is a genius? And it's terrestrial radio, so you can't give a long-winded answer. But I've tried to give a version of what I'm trying to do now, which is to say that we think about genius as the quality of an individual. Mm-hmm. Think of it in personalized terms. What if we thought about it more as an emergent property of a system?
Yeah.
Could we say that Trump has a kind of genius, but he is not himself a genius in the kind of honorific sense of the term? Yes. Trump has, probably mostly by intuition, innovated a completely new political style that will be with us forever. He's probably the most consequential American president since Andrew Jackson. So could we look at Musk and also say that when you look at Musk as a system, when you look at Muskism, does it exhibit properties of genius in the sense that it innovates new styles that do in fact have a quite meaningfully disruptive effect on the social environment in ways that perhaps rewire it for the future? I think yes, probably. But it's important, again, that we're not making a moral case here. We're not saying, well, he deserves it, he should keep his $1 trillion. We're really trying to make an analytic case about understanding the sources of his power.
I think it's also a question of what our claim is, right? And I think in most cases, we're not making a causal claim that Musk made history go in a certain way, and without him, it wouldn't have gone that way. More often than not, we're seeing the causality go the other way, which is what Musk has had that genius for, is sensing new market opportunities and then often moving very quickly into them, maybe in some cases earlier than others, and then later on, others did. So SpaceX is a very good example, as we describe in the book. I mean, it's 2002, immediately after the wake of the launch of the global war on terror. Musk says, hey, the time is ripe for me to slide into the position that the military primes have dominated for decades and to start to challenge them and to have a go at the legacy contractors and use legal tools and use some of the rhetoric of the government itself against it to crack open a new client base. And it worked, right? And after he did it, Palantir did it. This is, I think, 2012, 2013 or something around there. And now the idea of military tech or hard tech has been discussed for the last 18 months as simply the forefront of investment and growth for Silicon Valley products. So I don't think it's that far-fetched to say that in that sense, his turning to the government as an important client in 2002 was kind of prescient because later on, others would do it too. He didn't make it happen. And the other example, with the globalization is, I think, worth mentioning because it was also, for me anyway, something I didn't know too much about before researching for the book. But the way that, Musk was setting up the Gigafactory, so he builds one, opens in Shanghai in 2019, was quite unusual compared to the way other auto factories were working, right? So rather than being dependent on a whole network of subcontractors and suppliers, rather than moving the object of the car around often across borders the way, say, like Fords are built in the United States, crossing back and forth to either Canada or Mexico several times before they are actually built, Tesla was doing as much as they could in-house. So that has since become their hallmark, and indeed Musk's kind of calling card is this idea of vertical integration, which was deeply, deeply uncool in the 2000s when he started doing it. And when the Gigafactory opens and 6 months later, COVID hits, and Tesla's factories are shut down in Fremont, California, and elsewhere, he's, of course, devastated and angry and lashes out at anyone he can and calls the containment policy fascist and the rest of it. But he rebounds more quickly than other car companies do because of that shortness of supply chains, because of the resilience that's built in through this model of vertical integration. And so to a lot of people there was another moment where, like him or hate him, people said like, oh, well, Musk was actually ahead of the curve with this trend towards nearshoring and reshoring. And now, it's again become the talk of the industry as the way things need to go. So it's an interesting, relationship between the market signals, you could say, that he picks up, and then his efforts to plug into them, which, as Ben has been insisting, isn't necessarily always conscious, or that's maybe not the most helpful way to look at it, but it's always allowing him to accumulate more. And since that is really the primary law of the capitalist, is to accumulate, then yes, he is finding new strategies and tactics, which are often then imitated, successfully and unsuccessfully by those that come after him. I mean, it's interesting to think of and Musk himself, of course, always boasts about things like this. The people who tried to imitate him have since disappeared. The Nikolas, wasn't that the name of the truck company that was just being pushed downhill? Even Blue Origin. I mean, Blue Origin isn't, if you want to think that we have a better country if we switch government contracts from Musk to Bezos, then even then, I mean, is it really a viable replacement? I mean, not yet. So yeah, I think that the best way to think about it, we think, is that different political moments produce certain market opportunities. And one of the traits that makes Muskism helpful to think with is that you can often see the opening up of new sectors and new domains for investment, new investment stories for people backing these endeavors that maybe didn't exist immediately before. And of course, that's just to wind it up, I mean, that is really the story of what SpaceX is the reason why it's valued so highly is because he's somewhat plausibly able to say, hey, I created the space economy as a plausible, investable space because I dropped the cost of launch by 90%. So all those things that were in the science fiction books and, libertarian dreamers in the 70s and 80s about like doing manufacturing in space and some space escalator and all that crap that seems super far-fetched still is. Mm-hmm. I mean, more than anyone.
Yeah.
But, he can sell it in a way that no one else could because of what he's managed to pull off.
Unfortunately, we still live in capitalism, and that means we need to talk about our partners and sponsors. But fortunately, our partners and sponsors are great. And if you want to support Dreaming Against the Machine directly, you can join us on Patreon, where $5 a month gives you the chance to ask questions of upcoming guests and a dedicated stream of cat pictures. We love our patrons, and we also love being a part of the Multitude Collective at multitudeshows.com. Multitude is a podcast company made up of passionate people creating shows you can count on. Shows like Simple and Clean. Simple and Clean is a show where hosts Misha Stenton and Mayana Barron and friends talk about Kingdom Hearts, a little video game franchise about really big feelings. Join them as they discuss the plot, characters, world building, music, fashion, fan base, and societal impact of a thing that, by all means, probably shouldn't even exist. Never heard of Kingdom Hearts? That's okay. They're here to break it down for you, explain why they love it, and hopefully to convince you that this weird little story deserves a place in your heart. Each week, they attempt to unravel how this deceptively expansive game series has touched an entire generation of deeply earnest weirdos. And along the way, realize that what they're talking about might not be just a video game, but a whole lot more. New episodes every Sunday, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And here's a word from our sponsors. One of this week's sponsors is Shaker and Spoon, a monthly cocktail and mocktail subscription. Full disclosure, they sent me a free box this month, and I'm excited to try it on a night off soon. Each box includes 3 original recipes from award-winning bartenders, with enough ingredients to make 4 of each of those drinks for at least 12 drinks in total. And each box includes everything you need to make the drink except for the alcohol. And they're built around 1 spirit per box, so you really just need 1 bottle of something that you probably already have on hand if you drink. And if you don't drink, Every box includes 0 proof options for every recipe, and some of the drinks are designed to be completely spirit-free from the start. The boxes come with recipe cards that include guidance on mixing techniques and glossary of terms that teach you how to shake, stir, build, and garnish these unusual cocktails with eclectic ingredients. And they also include everything else that you need to try out these drinks, like custom syrups, bitters, extracts, garnishes, and aromatics. And so you can try the drinks without going off and buying full bottles of niche ingredients that you'll never use again. It's a great idea for date nights or hosting a party or bringing a gift to someone else's party. And you can always skip or swap boxes or even just buy individual kits or ingredients without subscribing. So you can try this stuff out at their website, shakerandspoon.com. Use code DATM for 10% off your purchase. Going back to that moment in 2020 where the Fremont plant closed because of COVID restrictions, there's a tweet from Musk that he sent out at the time that I feel like encapsulates so much of what he is and how he operates. He posted, "There will be no Mars if we let them take our freedom away." And there's so much there. It's such a perfect tweet in terms of like what Musk is and how he thinks. Because of course, there's not going to be 1 million people on Mars, no matter what happens. And also taking our freedom away is not what was happening. They were just interfering with his manufacturing processes. But it is fascinating to me because, yes, it's true. SpaceX created, the modern space economy, but it's also true that, as you just said, and as I was just saying about that tweet, these ideas that people have about what is coming for the economy in space is mostly wrong, and not really a matter of opinion, a matter of, physics. And that is so much of why SpaceX is valued so highly, especially right now in the wake of that IPO. Although, of course, as of at least yesterday, I haven't looked this morning, the numbers are coming down, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, that valuation for SpaceX was not based on what it does now and what it could plausibly do in the near future. Most of that valuation was based on stuff that isn't going to happen, like putting, terawatts of data centers into orbit and millions of people on Mars. These things are just not going to occur. And listeners, if you don't know why, we're going to have an episode about that real soon, or you can go read my book. But I mean, this brings me back to a question that everybody always asks about Musk, and I tend to dismiss, but I think you guys are going to have a more interesting answer. I get asked a lot, what happened to Musk? Right? Like the bumper sticker that you quote in your book, I bought this before Elon went crazy about the Teslas. I never liked Musk. I like to joke and say that I'm a hipster about hating Elon Musk. I hated him before it was cool. I've never liked him, but there's definitely been a shift in how people think about him. When you talked about Obama's industrial policy around Tesla, I think that's right. I think that is industrial policy. And I also kind of have to think that right now Obama is probably kicking himself. But he was certainly not the only one who thought that was a reasonable thing to do and that Musk was a reasonable person to partner with. And there's been a massive shift in how he conducts himself publicly, for sure. And in the book, you sort of trace some of that to social media and him realizing that he can sort of manipulate markets and, cryptocurrencies with the power of attention. But I would be curious because, generally when people ask me what happened to Musk, I say, "Oh, nothing really. This is the mask coming off. He was always like this." I get the sense that you two maybe don't completely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you do hear versions of this argument that Musk has always been on the far right, and we can't look into his soul to know precisely, but he was not making the kind of pronouncements that he's making now in the mid 2010s and the 2000s and the 1990s. So certainly his public persona has shifted quite sharply to the right.
Yep.
The question of what happened to Musk is something we devote the second half of our book to. So I'd encourage listeners who want a more detailed exposition of this to pick it up. But I would say more concisely that for us, the answer of Musk's rightward shift is inextricably bound up with what we call his cyborg turn, which is his growing conviction from the mid-2010s onward that humanity is becoming ever more entangled with its technology, and that in so doing, we are becoming cyborgs. This is a word he uses directly. And further, that this process of cyborg synthesis is something that we should welcome, something that we should accelerate, because, and this brings us into territory that you're familiar with, Adam, because in Musk's view, riffing on figures like Nick Bostrom, the only way to avoid the existential risk of a superintelligent AI exterminating the world is to merge with computers such that we impart enough of ourselves to the AI that it won't destroy us. So that may seem very far afield from Musk talking about white genocide and trying to rile up anti-migrant sentiment. But in our view, they're actually very closely linked, because what happens in the 2000s, you mentioned the factory closure in Fremont by public health order of Alameda County officials in 2020. And this is only for about 7 weeks. The factory's not closed terribly long. Musk actually reopens it in defiance of the order. But this is a quite frightening moment for Musk. His prerogatives as a capitalist are being directly challenged by the state. He reacts with alarm, as many other figures in the business class did, not just in Silicon Valley, but across the country. But then, of course, what else happens in 2020? Well, we have the George Floyd uprising, the largest social movement in U.S. history in the spring and summer of 2020. We have also the election of Joe Biden. In fact, directly as a result of those protests, as a lot of social scientific research has shown. And Biden, in turn, pursues a relatively progressive domestic policy, which involves a pro-labor NLRB, Lena Khan at the FTC getting serious about a regulatory and antitrust push, even some early moves around AI regulation and so forth. And for Musk, and really to his colleagues in the Silicon Valley leadership class, these are all very threatening developments. Now, here I think Musk is quite characteristic of his milieu. I think one of the things we try to toggle between in the book is, where is Musk being like other people in his world, and where is Musk being distinctive? When it comes to feeling freaked out by the social movement politics of 2020 and freaked out by Biden's domestic progressivism, Musk is frankly like every other capitalist in America. This is a very common response. And in particular in Silicon Valley, where they're mourning the centrism of an Obama-style figure and wondering, where did all of these activists in the street come from? How did the American left revivify itself and start talking about justice and equality and class and race in ways that were really pretty much absent from the scene in the 2000s when Musk was emerging as a kind of Obama darling. Where Musk is distinctive, however, is the form that his rightward politicization takes. Not so much the content, but the form. And the form can be summarized quite succinctly. The form is a single phrase, which is the woke mind virus. This is the phrase that is most closely associated with must turn to the right. And your reaction was perfect, because when we say this phrase in public, presenting the book, people groan, they roll their eyes, they laugh, understandable reactions.
Yeah.
But for us, a real breakthrough occurred when we moved past that and realized, oh, actually, the best way to understand this phrase is not as a joke, not as a metaphor, not as a symbol of some kind, but actually is completely literal.
Yeah.
That Musk believes that these various developments, factory closure, people yelling Black Lives Matter, tech workers talking about forming unions on Silicon Valley campuses, Lena Khan at the FTC. What do all of these things have in common? Well, they're all emanations of a mental contagion called the woke mind virus. And the woke mind virus is a disease that afflicts the software of people's brains, and it is transmitted through the networks of our giant cybernetic collectives, as he describes them. So if you can recall that vision of cyborg synthesis that I spoke about just a moment ago, which in the mid-2010s he was celebrating. We're using our smartphones more, we're more online. These are good things. This is how we impart our humanity to the machines so that they don't kill us all. Now he sees this process of cyborgification as potentially a vector for bad ideas that can cause people to behave in ways that run counter to his interests. So I think that's the best way to understand Musk, not only as a figure who's moved to the right, but as a figure who embodies what we describe as cyborg conservatism. It's a cybernetically mediated vision of what politics is, and it comes with its own appropriately cybernetic political intervention, which is, what do you do about the woke mind virus? If your view of politics is that it occurs through memes, through the transfer of information into people's minds, through networks, then you seize control of those networks and you reprogram them such that different memes circulate. You propagate an anti-woke mind virus. And this is how we can understand the transformation of Twitter into X, and in fact, the creation of XAI and Grok.
Okay, I have a lot of responses to that, and I also have other things I was hoping to talk to you guys about, but we are running out of time. And so I am going to skip to the end of the stuff that I wanted to talk to you about, which is at the end of your book. You sort of take that idea of the anti-woke mind virus to its sort of logical conclusion, and you map out possible futures for what would happen with Musk, but also what Musk sort of wants for the future, and you sketch out a sort of idealized vision of what Musk would want things to be like 10, 15 years from now. And it's quite terrifying, involving basically Musk having complete control over the information economy, far-right governments in power worldwide, and repression of ethnic minorities, queer and genderqueer people, so on and so forth. I don't think that we are necessarily headed there. I don't think that you two think that we are necessarily headed there. But what I want to know is, what does your understanding of Muskism give us in terms of ways to fight back against Musk's power?
Yeah, I mean, I think that our choice in ending the book that way was really a response to the dominant way that Musk has been narrated in public for the last couple of decades until now, which is really as a brilliant engineer and businessman, right?
Right.
So if you take the analogy to Fordism, it's kind of like just focusing on the assembly line and innovations in production and the kind of cars that he was able to make. So the rockets, the cars, the Iron Man sort of self-image.
Yeah.
The question that, to circle back to the way we started the conversation, the question we wanted to ask was, what version of ideology and social relations are assumed to back up and make possible that production model? So what are the things that are not the cars and not the factories? What kind of realignment with governments, realignment with consumers, et cetera? What is the belief system that's supposed to make this whole thing tick? Like, how's that supposed to work? So we, did our best kind of analytically to bolt all the different parts of the Musk empire together. What's interesting about the present moment is he's doing that himself, right? So the SpaceX that IPO'd in June was not just the rockets and satellites, but it was also the AI company. It was also X.com. It was also the chatbot Grok. And it was actually now sort of doing the work materially that we had to do interpretively before, because now he is saying he's building a vertically integrated and innovation engine. That's the one-liner to describe what SpaceX is. And the folding in of Tesla is, from the opinion of many observers, not far behind, in no small part because the macro hard or digital optimist part of SpaceX is a very important part, as it's about how to create humanoid robots who can replace white-collar workers sitting behind screens. So you need the Optimus segment of Tesla to be right inside the factory to be doing that with the SpaceX AI segment of the firm. So in that scenario you describe, that's what we illustrate or speculate the appearance of, is a world in which, in the vignette that we offer, a guy goes to his job and ports with his Neuralink into Grok and conducts state business of location and expulsion of unwanted illegal immigrants. Meanwhile, his daughter is at school, similarly porting into Grok through Neuralink and receiving a module about superiority of Western civilization and, generally receiving kind of system affirmative education that is designed to reinforce a sense of social danger and enmity against anything that's not coded inside of the white Western bubble. Meanwhile, there's a kind of energy shortage because the grid is being taxed to run the data centers upon really which the whole thing depends. Keep in mind that 85% of the promised market for SpaceX is the enterprise AI sector.
Yeah.
So that's supposedly where all this money is being made. But when we, I think, set up that image, we weren't saying this is inevitable or like we're all being frog marched towards this telos without any possibility of egress or exit. In fact, to respond to your question, I think that he's filled with vulnerabilities. There is the loss of investor confidence, right? The loss of 20% of, or sorry, was it 10% of SpaceX's value within the first few days of trading up and down shows that these things can change very quickly. MSCI, one of the big kind of firms that provides ratings, gave SpaceX a 1 out of 5 stars on their corruptions and controversies, or their controversies index, because of all of the political question marks over relying so heavily on someone like Musk with all of his erratic behavior and completely concentrated monopolistic control of the firm. So you could get questions coming from institutional investors. You could get loss of faith from retail investors. You can get adverse legislation. So the EU has just set aside part of its spectrum for EU-produced satellites in pursuit of what they call satellite sovereignty. And this is already causing Musk some headaches and anger. He doesn't have, remember, Starlink receivers in India. He doesn't have them in South Africa. Brazil has shown its willingness to fight back against him. If that many countries in the world reject the use of Musk's products, then the profits that he promises can't actually be realized. And eventually he kind of runs out of rope with investors. So I think a combination of just exposure to market, ups and downs, and then grassroots mobilization, pushing lawmakers to, get off X, divest public employee unions from these unaccountably governed firms like SpaceX and Tesla, even if they are in the indexes. I think that these things are actually starting to happen, and the vulnerabilities are starting to accumulate, I think. And Musk's turn to ever more inflammatory rhetoric, fomenting race riots in Northern Ireland and so on, is almost a sign of his irritation, not to say desperation, but a sense that he's not actually living as ironclad an existence as he would like to think.
As you mention in the book, and as he himself has said, if the stock price of SpaceX and Tesla went to zero, he would go bankrupt almost immediately.
Exactly.
And
let's make it happen.
No, let's make it happen. Absolutely. I think that that's a good place to end it. Thank you guys for coming on. This was a lot of fun. I don't know, we'll have to have you back because I have more that I wanted to talk to you about, including Asimov's Foundation trilogy and its importance to Musk, and Quinn, your book, Hayek's Bastards. So we'll see you guys again soon, I hope.
All right, Adam, thanks for having us.
Thanks again, Adam.
Thanks again to this week's guests, Ben Tarnoff and Quinn Slobodian. Next week, we have Kathy O'Neill, and we talk about the pernicious uses of mathematics. To submit questions for future guests and to suggest other guests, and to see more pictures of Babka, join the conversation on Patreon. You can also find us on YouTube, on Instagram at DATMPod, on the web and on Blue Sky at dreamingagainstthemachine.com, or just find us wherever you get your podcasts. Dreaming Against the Machine is a proud member of Multitude Productions. Our executive producer is Nick Carissimi. Our theme music is by Jared Emerson Johnson. Our show logo is by Nick James. And our fearless leader is Babka, the greatest cat in the observable universe. I'm Adam Becker, and I'll see you next week.